the last ASMR video, I talked about my tattoos and about how I had a phantom tattoo. And I talked a little bit about the books and stuff like that. So I thought that it would be very full circle of me to read from this one, which is Susan Kay's Phantom. And basically this book is the story of Eric, who's the Phantom of the Opera. It's the story of his life. It spans his entire lifetime, so it's pretty thick, and there's a lot in it, and it's from various different points of view of all the different characters. For instance, we're going to start with Madeline, who is Eric's mother, and it's from her point of view, and that's pretty much the only person we're going to hear from today. So, just to give you an idea of kind of how the book is laid out, you do hear from Eric many times. There's many parts that are from his point of view, but we're going to start with Madeline. So, I do love reading actual books and not reading a Kindle or listening to an audiobook. I much prefer an actual book. This one's really cool. I like this book a lot. I'm sorry if my jacket's going to be really loud this entire time, but leather's kind of tricky. We will begin. Like I said, we start from Madeline's point of view, who is Eric's mother. She's an evil, terrible woman, and I'm sure by the time I'm finished with this, you will hate her as much as I do. Okay. It was a breech birth, and so right up to the very last moment of innocent ignorance, I remained aware of the midwife's boisterous body encouragement. Just the head now, my dear, almost there. Your son is almost born. But now we must take great care. Do exactly what I say. Do you hear me, madam? Exactly. I nodded and drew a panting breath, clinging to the towel that had been hung on the wooden bedstead beside my head. The candlelight threw huge shadows up into the ceiling, strange leering shapes that were oddly threatening to me in the mindless delirium of pain. In that last lonely moment of thrusting anguish, it seemed to me that there was no one left alive in the world but me, shut up for all eternity in this bleak prison of pain. There was a great bursting, tearing sensation, and then peace and silence. The breathless hush of stunned disbelief. I opened my eyes to see the midwife's face, rosy with exertion only moments before, slowly draining of color, and my housemaid, Simonette, backing away from the bed with one hand pressed against her mouth. I remember thinking, it must be dead, but sensing even in that confused split second before I knew the truth, that it was worse than that, much worse. Struggling to sit up against the damp pillow, I looked down at the bloody sheets beneath me and saw what they had seen. I did not scream. None of us screamed, not even when we saw it make a terrible, feeble movement, and we realized that it wasn't dead. The sight of the thing that lay upon the sheet was so unbelievable that it denied all power of movement to the vocal cords. We only stared, the three of us, as though we expected our combined dumbstruck horror to melt this harrowing abomination back into the realm of nightmare where it surely belonged. The midwife was the first to recover from her paralysis, swooping forward to cut the cord with a hand that shook so badly she could hardly hold the scissors. "God have mercy," she muttered, crossing herself instinctively. "Christ have mercy." I watched with numb, detached calm as she rolled the creature in a shawl and dropped it into the cradle that lay beside the bed. "Run and fetch Father Mansart," she told Simonette in a trembling voice. "Tell him he had better come here at once." Simonette wrenched the door open and fled down the unlit staircase without a backward glance at me. She was the last servant to live under my roof. I never saw her again after that terrible night, for she never came back, even to collect her belongings from the attic bedroom. When Father Mansart came, he came alone. The midwife was waiting for him at the door. She had done all that her duty required of her, and now she was impatient to be gone and forget the part she had played in this bad dream. Impatient enough, I observed detachedly, to have overlooked the matter of payment. "Where's the girl?" she demanded with immediate displeasure. "The maid, father, is she not with you?" Father Mansart shook his graying head. "The little mademoiselle refused to accompany me here. She was quite out of her senses with fright, and I could not persuade her otherwise." "Well, that doesn't surprise me," said the midwife darkly. "Did she tell you that the child is a monster?" "In all my years I've never known anything like this, and I've seen some sights, as you well know, father. But it doesn't look very strong. I suppose it's a mercy." I listened incredulously. They were talking as though I weren't there, as though this dreadful thing had rendered me some kind of deaf, mindless idiot who had forfeited all right to human dignity. Like the creature in the cradle, I had become an object of horrified discussion. I was no longer a person. The midwife shrugged herself into her shawl and picked up her basket. "I dare say it'll die. They usually do, thank God. And it's not made a cry. That's always a good, hopeful sign. No doubt it'll be gone by morning, but at any rate, it's none of my business now. I've done my part. If you'll excuse me, father, I must be getting along. I promised to look in on another confinement. Madame Lescott, her third, you know." The midwife's voice trailed away as she disappeared out into the darkness on the landing. Father Mansart closed the door behind her, put his lantern down on the chest of drawers, and laid his wet cloak across the chair to dry. He had a comfortable, well-lived-in face, tanned and leathery from walking in all the weathers. I suppose he must have been about 50. I knew he had seen many terrible things in the course of his long ministry. Nevertheless, I saw him recoil involuntarily with shock when he looked into the cradle. One hand tightened on the crucifix around his neck, while the other hastily made the sign of the cross. He knelt in prayer for a moment before coming to stand by the side of my bed. "My dear child," he said compassionately, "do not be deceived into believing that the Lord has abandoned you. Such tragedies as this are beyond all mortal understanding. But I ask you to remember that God does not create without purpose." I shivered. "It's still alive, isn't it?" He nodded, biting his full underlip, glancing sadly at the cradle. "Father," I hesitated fearfully, trying to summon the courage to continue, "if I are suggesting is murder. But surely in this case, it would be a kindness. It would be a sin, he said severely. A mortal sin. I urge you to put all thoughts of such wickedness from your mind. It is your duty to succor a human soul. You must nourish and care for this child as you would any other. I turned my head away on the pillow. I wanted to say that even God could make mistakes. But even in the depths of my despair, I could not quite find the courage to voice such blasphemy. How could this horrible abomination be human? It was as alien to me as reptile, ugly, repulsive, and unwanted. What right had any priest to insist that it should live? Was this God's mercy? God's infinite wisdom? Tears of exhaustion and outraged misery began to steal down my taut face as I stared at the striped wallpaper before my eyes. For 3 months I had struggled through an unending maze of tragedy, following the one candle that burned steadily just beyond my reach and beckoned me on the small flickering light of hope contained in the promise of new life. Now that that candle had been extinguished, there was only darkness. Darkness in the bottomless, smooth-sided abyss of the deepest pit in hell. For the first time in my life, I was alone. No one was going to shield me from this burden. I think it would be wise if I baptized the child at once, said Father Mansard grimly. Perhaps you would like to give me a name. I watched the priest move slowly around the room, a tall shadow in his black habit, collecting my porcelain wash bin and blessing the water within. I had meant to call a son Charles, after my dead husband, but that was impossible now, the very idea quite obscene. A name. I must decide upon a name. A sense of unreality had descended upon me once more, a numb, unthinking stupor that seemed to paralyze my brain. I could think of nothing, and at last, in despair, I told the priest to name the child after himself. He looked at me for a long moment, but made no comment, no protest, as he reached down into the cradle. I baptize thee, Eric, he said slowly, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Then he leaned forward and placed the muffled bundle into my arms with a determination I dared not to fight. This is your son, he said simply. Learn to love him as God does. Collecting his lantern and his cloak, he turned to leave, and presently I heard the old stairs creaking beneath his heavy tread, the front door closing behind him. I was alone with the monster that Charles and I had created out of love. Never in my life had I experienced such fear, such utter misery, as I did in that first moment when I held my son in my arms. I realized that this creature, this thing, was totally dependent on me. If I left it to starve or freeze to death, it was my soul that would burn for all eternity. I was a practicing Catholic, and I believed only too seriously in the existence of hell's flames. Fearfully, with a trembling hand, I parted the shawl that covered the child's face. was not. But nothing like this. The entire skull was exposed beneath a thin, transparent membrane, grotesquely riddled with little blue pulsing veins, sunken mismatched eyes, and grossly malformed lips, a horrible gaping hole where the nose should have been. My body, like some imperfectly working potter's wheel, had thrown out this pitiable creature. He looked like something that had been dead a long time. All I wanted to do was bury him and run. Through my revulsion and horror, I became aware that he was watching me. The misallied eyes, fixed intently and wondering upon mine, were curiously sentient and seemed to study me with pity, almost as though he knew and understood my horror. I had never seen such awareness, such powerful consciousness in the eyes of any newborn child, and I found myself returning his stare, grimly fascinated, like a victim mesmerized by a rattlesnake. And then he cried. I have no words to describe the first sound of his voice and the extraordinary response it invoked in me. I had always considered the cry of the newborn to be utterly sexless, piercing, irritating, curiously unattractive, but his voice was a strange music that brought tears rushing to my eyes, softly seducing my body so that my breasts ached with a primitive and overwhelming urge to hold him close. I was powerless to resist his instinctive plea for survival. But the moment his flesh touched mine, and there was silence, the spell was broken. Panic and revulsion seized me. I dashed him from my breast as though he was some disgusting insect sucking my blood. I flung him down without caring where he fell, and escaped to the farthest corner of the room. And there I cowered like a hunted animal, with my chin pressed tightly against my knees, and my arms wrapped around my head. I wanted to die. I wanted us both to die. If he had cried again in that moment, I know I would have killed him. First him, and then myself. But he was silent. Perhaps he was already dead. Deeper and deeper into the shelter of my own body, I huddled, rocking to and fro like some poor, unhinged creature in an asylum, burrowing away from the burden I could not face. Life had been so beautiful until this last summer, too easy, too full of pleasure. Nothing in its brief, cosseted length had prepared me for the tragedies that rained relentlessly upon me since my marriage to Charles. Nothing had prepared me for Eric. I don't really know how I managed to hold it together. I normally cry 2 pages in and also get very angry, which I do feel very angry, which maybe you fell asleep or you zoned out before you realized what I was saying when I was reading this. Like I said, Eric's mother is horrible, just terrible. So there's still a bit more of her part here, but I'm going to stop there for today. I'll probably continue to do these videos and read from this book in particular. I think that at least until we make it to some of Eric's parts, because that for me is when it actually gets interesting. But now you know what happened when he was born, and how horrible his mother is. We hate her. So yeah, that was a little bit of Phantom by Susan Kay. I very much encourage going to have to order it online because I don't think you can find it in stores anymore. I don't even think that they print this book anymore. But you can find everything on the internet. But I very much encourage you to read it for yourself. It's one of my favorite books, and it's very hard to read. I will warn you now. It's very hard to read. There's a lot of really upsetting things in this book, but it helps you understand the character of the Phantom a lot more, and although it doesn't absolve him of any wrongdoings he might have done, it does explain to you why he did them. So, yeah, like I said, I'll continue to read from this book, but that's going to be all that I will do for tonight. When we pick up again, we just get into Madeline's background, her story, where she came from, her relationship with Charles, Eric's father, things like that. And we might even make it all the way to the dreaded birthday party. So, just wonderful. You can only imagine how awful that goes. So, yes, I hope that you enjoyed this and that it relaxed you. And I will see you